Hello, welcome back to the sewing room. I'm Lara and I'm here to talk today about my favorite knit fabrics and hopefully help you pick out the right fabric for your next project. Now, choosing fabrics is something that's, I think, a challenge for just about every person who sews. So, occasionally you're going to mess up and you're going to end up with something you don't love, but hopefully if you know a little bit more, it'll make making those choices a little bit easier. So yeah, let's get started. All right, let's start with an overall disclaimer. It's very easy to get convinced that the type of knit fabric and the content, meaning the material it's made out of, are one and the same. But they're not. Different kinds of fabrics that are commercially available do tend to fall into basic camps, but a single knit is a single knit, a double knit is a double knit, a sweatshirt knit is a sweatshirt knit. Those are all kinds of fabrics. And then within that, it could be cotton, it could have some spandex in it, it could be polyester, it could have some rayon in it. There's a lot of different things that can contribute to the way a fabric acts besides just the way it's made. The Stitchery, I believe, recently did a really good video about types of knit fabrics and tried a bunch of different ones, so definitely check that out if you want to learn a lot more about that. Your first step when seeing if your pattern and your fabric are going to play well together is to see how stretchy it is. Now, some patterns will actually list a percentage of stretch, but some patterns also have what I believe they call a pick a knit rule, or what you might call, if you were, more normal, stretch guide. So what that looks like is, see, we have this dark bar here, and then there's a little bit more length there, and let me zoom in a little bit so you can see even better. Yes, okay. So the way that works is basically they've taken, this is 4 inches long, and they've said 4 inches of fabric should stretch, in this case, 1 more inch to 5 inches, which translates to a 25% stretch. And here's how you actually test that with your fabric. You don't want to use the cut edge or the far edge of the fabric. You want to take a fold on the crosswise direction or on the stretchiest direction of the fabric. Some fabrics are stretchier up and down than left to right, but almost always it's going to be left to right. So I've got a folded piece of fabric here, and I'm just going to hold it up to my guide, and then I'm going to hold it gently and then stretch it, and then see, can I stretch it a little bit more? Yes. And I like to do that because I don't consider the most a fabric can stretch to be its actual stretch fabric. If I'm seeing, especially for a dark printed fabric like this, if I'm seeing a lot of white when I stretch it, or if it just feels hard to pull, then that is stretched too tight. I don't want my dress to be that tight, or my shirt to be that tight, or my pants to be that tight. So instead, I always think, what's the comfortable feeling for stretch for this fabric? Is it here? Is it out here? Is it back here? And actually this does happen to be a pretty good 25% stretch fabric. Now, if you don't have something like this, or a pattern envelope, and your instructions or your pattern have just said a stretch percentage, you basically set it up the same way. You're going to measure 4 inches out, like that. In this case, I have this nice grid to work on, so I can use that as my guide. And basically do the same thing. You're going to fold along the widthwise of the fabric. Start at 0 with one hand, and then with your other hand you're going to stretch to see where that comfortable stretch stops. And in this case, yeah, we're seeing about, this is going to about 5 inches. So that's 25% stretch. Now, I started with degree of stretch because that is important, and you really want to try to match your fabric to your pattern, but occasionally you will find you just absolutely love this particular fabric and you really want it to use it with this pattern, but the stretch is different. Well, a lot of times, if it's not super different, like say it's your fabric is 33% stretch instead of 25, or it's 20 instead of 25, then sometimes you can get away with just choosing a slightly different size of the pattern. So if you normally cut like a size 14 and you have a stretchier fabric, you might go down to a size 12. Or if you have a less stretchy fabric, then you might go up to a size 16. It's one of those things you can kind of experiment with knits, and occasionally some of the details will have to be, you know, massaged a little bit, but that usually can give you a really good starting point. So the first question is, does the stretch percentage match? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, do I need to adjust the sizing on this pattern for me? Stretch isn't the only thing that matters with knit fabrics though. You also have weight of the fabric, how thick, how heavy it is, and also what's called drape. And drape is very difficult to quantify. You do sometimes see weight of fabric quantified, especially if you're buying fabric online. They'll say light, medium, or heavy, or sometimes they'll even say grams per a certain size of the fabric. Personally, I don't necessarily my brain isn't able to comprehend what that really means, and so sometimes if I'm ordering a fabric sight unseen online, I'm just kind of crossing my fingers and hoping that it's going to be what I like, or if I have already made a particular style of fabric from a particular online site in a different color, then I can be more confident, like, okay, I know I really liked the fabric last time, I'm gonna keep buying it. But, so just to show you a little bit, so I do kind of have a test for, so weight is kind of self-explanatory, it's how thick the fabric is, right? Like these are both, I think this is a double knit. This is a double knit fabric, and I'm comparing it here to a single knit fabric. But not every double knit is very, very thick, and not every single knit is very, very thin, although typically double knits are going to be slightly thicker than a single knit. But on top of the general like thickness and weight of the fabric, there's also the drape. And the way that I kind of try to see if a fabric is like super drapey versus only a little drapey is I'll just put a sample of it over my hand, and I'm looking to see how well can I see my knuckles. And that's pretty darn well. So this is a very drapey fabric. This is a double knit, which doesn't necessarily tell you anything about how drapey it is. It's still pretty nice and drapey there. And then this, or has good drape. This is a sweatshirt fabric, but it's a pretty thin one. And I would say this has a little bit less definition. So this is obviously not very scientific, but I will occasionally kind of, if I'm in especially in a store shopping, I'll kind of want to see what the fabric looks like over my hand, so that I can get a sense of, is this going to be a fabric that's going to cling really tightly to the body, or is it going to have a little bit more of a flow? What are the characteristics that I'm going to get out of this in a garment? Those of you who've been following the channel for a while know that I am a huge, huge fan of doing muslins or test sewing my garments. And the question kind of comes up, how do you muslin or test sew for knit fabrics? And the answer is it's kind of tough. You can kind of see why it would be, because if every different fabric has a different way of landing on the body and a different stretch and a different, you know, vibe to it, how do you muslin? Well, and even in wovens, we are kind of approximating, right? Like when you make a test sew or a muslin garment out of actual muslin or even broadcloth or shirting, it is still going to act a little bit different from if you make it out of a voile or a denim. So you are already kind of guessing a little bit. So you could go the route that we use in woven fabrics and say, okay, I'm just going to buy some really inexpensive knit fabric, ideally that at least has the same general stretch factor, and use that as my muslin. If you're really serious about fit and or very anxious about fit, you might also just buy basically twice as much fabric as you think you might need, so that way if it just goes completely off the rails the first time, you can just start over. That is definitely the high cost method, but I do also, as I've mentioned before, when I like a fabric, I tend to buy a lot of it anyway. And especially for knits, once I found a knit fabric that I really like this one, I just keep buying it. Actually, I have bought this exact fabric in 2 different colors in the last 2 years, and I'll probably just keep going as long as they keep making it. Alright, so current favorite fabric, if you can't tell. Right now, especially for when the weather is warm, I love a nice single knit fabric, sometimes called a jersey fabric. That's what I'm wearing right now, and it's also, this is also that. Right now, my favorite kind of that fabric is either 95.5 cotton lycra or 92.8 cotton lycra, which is what this is. And I just find it very comfortable. It's easy to work with. It isn't too slippery. Like for example, this is also a single knit, but I believe this was either 100%, I think this is probably polyester spandex, and I think it may have actually meant to be like swimsuit fabric, but I bought it really early on in my sewing journey and I made this shirt. And to be honest, I don't wear it very much. I probably should wear it more. If you've ever noticed, I do actually use this fabric. I used it quite a bit. I made a really nice sports bra out of it that I love. And it's also kind of the bottom half of my sewing mannequin in my corner over there. But I don't think this is the easiest fabric in the world to work with. It's very slippery. It is very stretchy, so that's kind of fun. But it is very slippery and it can be a little bit harder to handle, whereas the cotton lycra is very, very easy to sew, very, very easy to fit. I love the way it feels on my body. The problem with synthetics is sometimes they do get a little bit, let's say, clammy when you're in humid weather. So I don't love that. So I don't have that problem with cotton. So that's just, for me, right now, this is my favorite kind of single knit fabric. Another really nice fabric to have kind of in your sewing arsenal is rib fabric. Now, I don't necessarily use rib for like the whole garment, but it's really great for if you're doing a jacket like this, then you can use it as your edge treatment for your collar, for your cuffs, for your bottom, and just like any other fabric. Again, there are different styles and kinds, thicknesses, and types of rib knit. But if you're getting into sewing knits, you do want to try a couple different kinds of it and figure out what works for you and what you like, and find your favorite. Another fabric that I really love, and this is partly because I live in a place where it gets really cold, so I did notice when I was making this list that I was definitely running the gamut from basically one summery fabric and then everything else was cozy. So, but forgive me. Anyway, this is a sweatshirt. Well, actually, I think technically this is actually a French terry. If you look really closely, you can see. Let me get that in focus. Yep. So the difference between a sweatshirt fleece and a French terry is that with a French terry, the little loops on the back of the fabric have not been cut. They're still whole. Whereas with a sweatshirt, it still has this lovely texture on the back, but the loops have all been cut open so that it's a little bit more fuzzy. And you might, this is actually a relatively light fabric for a sweatshirt. You can even see, again, it has a lot of drape. It's not super, super thick. It's relatively stretchy. It's probably not going to be as it's not as stretchy as the single knit I showed you before. But for me, it's just a nice layering piece, and I think it's fun. I think it's pretty. So if you're interested in sewing on knits, but you don't necessarily want to make super stretchy t-shirt knits yet, sweatshirt fleece and French terry are both really good options, because I think when the fabric is a little bit more sturdy, but not like super, super thick, then it's a little easier to handle. The single knits and the kind of, especially the slinkier single knits, can be a little bit harder to sew just because they kind of move around a lot on you, versus if you have a slightly thicker than a t-shirt, but maybe not as thick as your thickest sweatshirt, then that's going to give you a little bit more sturdiness under the sewing needle, so that you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't stretch out as easily when you're sewing as a single knit would. It's going to retain its shape better as you're sewing, and it's going to be a little bit easier to manage. So I think I like it just generally as a fabric, but it's also really good for a beginning sewing project for knits. Another fabric that I absolutely love is thermal knits. Sometimes they're called waffle knits if you look really closely at the texture. Come on, focus. You can kind of see why. Now, I always just associated this fabric with long underwear, frankly, but then I found this one, and I love that darker color. I felt like really elevated it and gave it more of a fashion sense. So again, I didn't use it. I could make a shirt out of this, but what I used it for was I made a really fantastic robe for last winter that I absolutely adore. It's really fun, nice fabric, again, to work, since it has a little bit more, it's not super thick, but it just has a little more body and recovery than single knit fabric does. So if you're looking for something to make something cozy, again, this is a great choice. And I actually couldn't resist talking about this in the video about choosing patterns, but honestly, Ponte is a great fabric. This is a Ponte jacket. It's a little wrinkled because I literally just pulled it out of the back of my closet because it's still like 90 degrees out, which is baloney. But the wonderful thing about Ponte is, again, it's a little easier to sew and manage than a single knit, and of course, the exact quality you're going to get is going to depend upon where you're getting it. But I do find, even though I do normally really like all natural fabrics like cotton, maybe a little cotton spandex, with the Ponte, it's pretty rare to find 100% cotton. And it's usually going to be a blend of cotton, spandex, and polyester. But the biggest tip that I heard when I was first starting to sew, that I have stuck to, that I have found to be true as well, is that if your Ponte fabric has even a very small amount of nylon in it, that is going to help it kind of lay better and have a better hand than if it was all polyester. And I think it also breathes a little bit better. So just a little tip there, if you're picking out a Ponte fabric and you're choosing between two different ones and one of them has a little bit of nylon, you want to choose the nylon option. A little nylon in your Ponte is also going to help reduce pilling, which is where the surface of the fabric starts to show really bad wear. And again, since I'm usually using this for relatively fitted garments that have underarms, I don't want to see a lot of pilling, or pants, God forbid, you should get some pilling in between the legs of your pants. Now those of you who are saying, what's the difference between Ponte and Ponte di Roma, there isn't a difference. It's just one is shorter than the other. It's basically an abbreviation when we say Ponte, but that's what everybody says, so that's what I'm going to keep saying. Oh, I realized I mentioned recovery without telling you about my recovery test. So along with fabric content, type of fabric, weight of fabric, drape of fabric, very, very important feature of knit fabrics is its recovery, which means how quickly and how well does the fabric bounce back from being stretched. So, you know, when you put it on, is your neckline going to stay wavy from you pulling it on? Is your fabric going to get increasingly baggy throughout the day as you wear it? That's not necessarily, having a bad recovery or poor recovery isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it might change your mind about what kind of pattern you want to make with that fabric. If you have a fabric without good recovery, then you probably don't want it to be a really fitted garment, or if you do want to do a really fitted garment, you might want to put a lining in to help keep the structure of the garment throughout the day so that your fabric isn't just growing and growing and growing as you go about your day. That's no fun. You know, that's just not fun. So let me show you the super quick, not very professional trick I use for testing the recovery of a fabric. All right, I have a cotton knit here. I want to see how good its recovery is. So I'm going to take my finger and wrap my finger very tightly in the fabric and kind of squeeze and poke it a little bit, and then pull my finger out and see what happens. There's still a dimple there. What happens if I kind of smooth it? There's still kind of a dimple there. So while I would say this is not bad recovery, it's not the snappiest recovery, so it's probably a good thing I made a semi-fitted t-shirt out of this instead of something very, very fitted that is going to stretch out. The one thing that our super synthetic fabrics like our kitty cats give us is hopefully the trade-off for super synthetic fabric is good recovery, which is part of why this makes such a good sports bra. Well, sports bra cover, the underneath there's a foam layer. And just basically as soon as I take my finger out, you already can't tell where it was, even in the light. So that is excellent recovery. And my beloved Ponte. Let's see what the recovery is like on this Ponte. Again, good hard poke. Pull it out. And it has already pretty much snapped back. You can kind of see where my finger was, but not really. So that's another thing I love about Pontes. They tend to have really good recovery. If this is your first time coming by, thank you so much for stopping by. If you've been here before, thanks for coming back. And as always, stick around for more. Hope to see you soon.